So often what we know is crafted by what we're told and the media that tells us that.
Israel is building very much on American propaganda and the ways America has done things in its previous wars in the Middle East. So this savior complex, also a very old trope, right? This is what the French have used against the Algerian. We know we're here to save you, we're better than who is ruling you, and under us you'll be better, you'll be freed. They're doing videos in 3D to justify and to manufacture consent on the fact that, there are weapons in the homes in South Lebanon. It doesn't seem Israel has learned its lesson from trying to occupy and invade Lebanon through its history, because every time it became a quagmire, a bit like Vietnam for the United States. The more they fail at the ground invasion, the more aerial bombing we witness. We should not be trying to uphold our values, trying to uphold our identity and culture. We should be mourning. We should be taking a break and mourning. And we can't, because there's no break for us. Like, this is an immense price to pay. I'm just hoping that in the process, we're making Zionism less mainstream.
Welcome to the AFIKRA podcast. My name is Mike Mhenna. Today on the series, we have another episode about Lebanon and Israel's genocide in Palestine and the regional war in Lebanon. On the series, we have Chloe Kattar, who is a historian of Lebanese history and is a research fellow in history at Darwin College at the University of Cambridge. Many of you may know her as Leb Historian on Instagram. Chloe, welcome to the series.
Very happy to be here today. Despite what's happening at home, we made it. Yeah.
Before we get started, I should say that this episode is being recorded on Tuesday, October 22nd at 4:30 Beirut Time, just to give context of the situation right now. Chloe, I was giving a talk yesterday, and people were asking me about what we know. Right, they were saying, what do we know? What do people know? What's the truth on the ground? What do we know? And so often what we know is crafted by what we're told and the media that tells us that. And today it seems as though, as has been true in history, there is as much of an information war as there is a military campaign, and a campaign for crafting the narrative, crafting what people think they know about the truth. And this has been one of the sort of tactics of the Zionists for a long time. So I wanted to start there and get a sense of what sort of Zionist propaganda are we seeing? How has that sort of machine changed? And what's going on now?
That's actually a very good question. Israeli propaganda, when it comes to Lebanon, especially in this latest genocidal campaign, is very much rooted, I would say, just to give a bit more of a historical perspective, is rooted in a very long tradition of imperial propaganda, right? To justify whatever the attacker, the colonizer, the imperial power is trying to do to another land, to another people. I'll go a bit more into detail when it comes to Israeli propaganda, but I want to say first that Israel is building very much on American propaganda and the ways America has done things in its previous wars in the Middle East. And I'm thinking here especially of Iraq. We can also obviously talk about Afghanistan, but we know very well that in both cases, there were mention of weapons, of like threats. In respectively Iraq and Lebanon that were perceived as threat to either the United States or to Israel now, right? And so back during the war on terror and the war on Iraq, all of this was construed around those weapons of mass destruction that supposedly were in Iraq, and this is how the whole campaign, the whole war on terror was marched upon by the United States. And Israel is very much using the same playbook now, saying that, they need to completely destroy Hezbollah's arsenal. They need to destroy Hamas's tunnels and stuff like that. And all of this is for self-defense. But there's a new component, or at least a developed component now, that Israel is also adding to this like self-defense argument, which is the savior argument, right? And it's especially prominent in Lebanon because it sees Hezbollah, or it presents Hezbollah as an entity that has trapped the Lebanese people. And so we can see in the latest very direct videos sent to the Lebanese people by many Israeli spokesperson, whether Netanyahu or the spokesperson in Arabic, Avichai Adrae. They speak directly to the Lebanese people, and they tell them that they're here not waging war against the Lebanese people, but against Hezbollah, and they're doing this to save the Lebanese people from Hezbollah, right? So this savior complex, also a very old trope, right? This is what the French have used against the Algerian. We're here to save you. We're better than who is ruling you, and under us, you'll be better. You'll be freed. Only yesterday, Avichai Adrae has published a video in Arabic telling the people of Lebanon that the money that's been stuck in those Israeli bunkers are actually the money of the Lebanese people that's been stolen, and the Israel is here to give back the money to the Lebanese people. So this propaganda has has reached absurd levels of using specific tropes of internal Lebanese politics and portray Israel as the savior in that. And that's not new. We know that Israel does this in Gaza. It did this the same thing in South Lebanon and in Beirut in previous wars, dropping leaflets saying that they're not here to harm, they're here only to attack terrorist targets, and civilians should be warned. But today, I think there's 18 years in between 2006 and the current campaign. They are using new ways of to share those messages. So prior, it was mostly leaflets. We know that in 2006, there was a psychological war unit within the occupation's army that would draw cartoons in Arabic, showing Nasrallah as this very bad person hiding amongst civilians and then throwing them in the villages in South Lebanon. So now they don't really use, they've probably dropped some leaflets, I'm sure, but they don't need that anymore as much. So now they use mostly social media. As I've said, they use very professional videos of themselves speaking directly to the audience. They use, as we've seen, also very developed infographics. They're doing videos in 3D to show, for instance, that to justify and to manufacture consent on the fact that, there are weapons in the homes in South Lebanon. But what's interesting is that they're not just saying this, they're making very professional videos that, use developed infographics, modern design, modern 3D tools, and that will mostly very much, grab the attention of the modern audience that's used to this sort of visuals, whether in movies, whether in video games. So they're really curating their content to the new generation and people who are might be very sensitive to those things. So there's definitely the use of social media, the use of direct speech through videos, infographics. Now they just share maps of Beirut, and tell us to evacuate 10 minutes later. So there's very much new technologies at hand. Yeah.
How much is how does their messaging change when it comes to narratives that are targeted not to locals, but to the sort of the broader public?
So it's
like,
interesting.
In many ways,
yeah.
Sorry, Chloe, just in many ways, the sort of ground zero in some ways is also the U.S. Congress, right? That if there's going to be any solution ever, it's going to be an American solution, because in so many ways this is exclusively an American problem, manufactured violence. So that's their audience probably more so.
Definitely. So that's a very good point, because even though they have some videos in Arabic, the videos by Netanyahu, these are in English. So we know very well that if he wanted to send a message to the Lebanese people, he can ask his Arabic spokesman to do so. But he decided to record his own videos in English, and that's because the real audience is the Western audience, the American Congress, all of those people who are the decision maker and who he knows will be very receptive to talk about war on terrorists, right? Of him talking directly to the Lebanese people, to save them, to put them aside in a very binary way from Hezbollah, from the terrorists. And all of this, will, very much catch the ear of American audience. And we know this because representative of the White House has said that, all of they're doing is just removing Hezbollah terrorists. It's a good thing for not only for Lebanon, but for the world. So it's definitely something that's been fabricated and done for this particular audience and this specific template and the specific narrative that we know will be very much receptive to that. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about not necessarily the last month, but maybe the last year. Because a lot of people who are listening to this might say, okay, the war started a month ago. And before then there wasn't a war. But for those of us living in Lebanon for the last year, this has been brewing for a long time. So maybe tell us the story of what's been actually happening the last year, and maybe even the last 5 or last 20 years.
So definitely, this new war on Lebanon on behalf of Israel has started on the 8th of October 2023. So we know that the aerial campaign, Israeli aerial campaign on Lebanon started then when Hezbollah fired some rockets in solidarity to what was happening in Gaza, and then it just developed into this tit-for-tat exchange of fire between Israel and Hezbollah. But unfortunately, because we're used in the collective imaginary to the South being the first respondent, not respondent is not the good word, but the first victim to any Israeli attack on Lebanon. We don't talk about it as much. Obviously, we have talked about it. The destruction and the bombing has mostly been for a year before September 2024, mostly gathered in the South. And it's been a month now that Israel has intensified its targets and attacks beyond the south, especially in the Bekaa region, but also in Beirut and beyond, right? Even in the northern part of the country. So I would say maybe, it's a two-stage war, and what's especially, different is that in September 2024 that they decided to go for ground invasion, which was brewing the whole time, but they hadn't done it yet. So now they're at the border and they're trying to enter. There are direct confrontations. So that's perhaps a bit the chronology of it, especially this war, the 2023-2024 war, or I don't know how we will call it, but the one that started last year. The last time that Israel tried to invade Lebanon or invaded Lebanon was obviously during the Lebanese Civil War. The last time was in 2006, but it was a very short invasion. The last time we remember a very long invasion was indeed during the Lebanese Civil War. In the past
Maybe
5 years.
let's start there.
Yeah. Okay.
Chloe, actually, let's go back for a second, because I think that people listening to this are going to get a little turnaround with the chronology. So maybe let's start in the 80s and just give people sort of a general sense. Israel's activities in the state of Israel's activities in Lebanon, their interest in southern Lebanon, their interest in the Litani, the sort of the chronology of this stuff, and how that ties to expansionist ideas that have existed as part of the Zionist project for a century at this point.
Very much. Yep. So the first Israeli invasion of Lebanon was in 1978. Back then, I think they sent a lot of troops to get rid, according to them, of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, right, which was launching its own resistance attacks from the south of Lebanon. So this is when Israel decided as a strategic aim to actually invade Lebanon and get rid or try to control OLP attacks from there. It stayed not very long, but what it succeeded in doing is created another kind of sister army, which was the South Lebanese army, right, which was mostly right-wing Christian militia acting on behalf of Israel and patrolling the border and doing its own bid, its own war there. And this was also the moment when UNIFIL was created, right? The United Nations Interim Force for Lebanon, which was created back then, again, to patrol what we call now the Blue Line, but the border between Lebanon and Israel, and try to, keep attacks and keep cross-border fire under control. So when the Southern Army and the UNIFIL were established, Israel thought, okay, that maybe things were calmed down, but they didn't. And so in 1982, it launched its second invasion, which was way more deadly, because this is where they arrived to Beirut. Right, so back then they had not been beyond the Litani River, but this is when they arrived to Beirut. They killed probably something like 20,000 people. At that point, it was a very deadly operation, and they obtained what Israel wanted as a strategic or military aim, which is to get rid of the leadership of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, right? So technically they had done what they wanted. And they left Beirut and retreated in different stages to the south in 83 and then 85. In 85, this is where they stood their ground to the Litani and stayed there in their what they called their security zone, which is really the buffer zone that they're like really obsessed about. And they say today that they want to try to recreate, which is a zone between 5 and 20 kilometers deep into Lebanese territory, which they, aim to control to make sure that there are no more attacks into northern Israel. But the problem is that they created themselves another problem, So once the OLP was out, you had other militias and other resistance trying to get rid of Israel in the south. And this is where Hezbollah was born as a consequence of Israeli occupation of the south of Lebanon. So they created another problem to get rid of the same old problem they had come in, from the start. So it's not very smart in terms of strategy. As we know it, Hezbollah kept fighting Israeli troops, and towards the end of the war, they really incurred a lot of casualties, the army, and it was becoming too much for the Israeli public. And so in 2000, it left. The army's occupation left Lebanon, and this was known as, the liberation of the South by the Lebanese resistance. And then in 2006, there's the other invasion. We know what happened. Hezbollah killed and kidnapped some Israeli soldiers. And so they tried again to not only invade, but also do a bit what they're doing now, which is an aerial campaign to retrieve those soldiers, but also to try and get rid of Hezbollah again. And it was a very inconclusive war for Israel. After the war happened, which was brief, compared to the previous war, it was only a 33 or 34 days war. There was a commission created within Israel to assess what this war had achieved, on behalf of Israel. And it was very self-critical, saying that, it didn't achieve what it said that it would achieve, which is, get rid of Hezbollah, bring back security to the north of Israel, etc., etc. So there's a long, and today again, the same story, trying to invade again to achieve military and strategic objectives that are harder for Israel to accomplish than it thinks. And so I think what I'd say through this very short historical overview is that it doesn't seem Israel has learned its lesson from trying to occupy and invade Lebanon through its history, because every time it became a quagmire. It became something, very bad for them, a bit like Vietnam for the United States. And they never really accomplished what they want, which is bring technically security to their northern settlements there. And, get rid of any sort of military resistance on the southern border. Even today, whatever they're doing now is not going to bring back the northern settlers, because even if they create the buffer zone in Lebanon, as they think they do, and they're still not able to really go in that deep, Hezbollah can fire long-range missiles from anywhere in Lebanon, and that would still create threats to the northern residents. So they keep trying to invade, knowing or not knowing, but that this is not the solution to their at least concern or strategic aims, which can only happen diplomatically. Yeah.
It seems as though there's, from afar, it seems as though there is no honest, authentic diplomatic initiatives, though. So.
No.
No.
Yeah. There's none. And that's because Israel wants to achieve what it wants by force. And they keep trying, and they don't learn their lessons. That's the problem. But it seems to me that the more they try by force to achieve their goals, right? The more they try to invade, the more they try to put boots on the ground, and obviously fail to achieve the goals set. In terms of the south of Lebanon, what they want to do with it. The destruction of Hezbollah is another question. The more they fail in that, the more barbaric they become, the more violent they become. And to me, I see a direct correlation in between those two things, right? So the more they fail at the ground invasion, the more aerial bombing we witness. The more they fail at military objectives against Hezbollah, the more civilian they target, right? And we see this in 1978. I think their invasion caused 2,000 deaths, Palestinian and Lebanese. In 2006, again, something around 1,000 casualties. Today, since October 2023, there's approximately 3,000 Lebanese dead, right? So we see how, and I'm not even talking about casualty and destruction, right? So there's a direct link between their barbarism and their violence and their inability to accomplish any of their goals. So I think, in terms of psychological warfare, they're trying to make up for this loss by destroying more, by bringing more chaos, and by projecting some sort of power. We're doing something. We're causing chaos, and we're putting pressure, and we're going to bring them to their knees. But in terms of what they're trying to achieve, they're not achieving this.
Yeah. Do you How long have you been in the UK?
7 years now.
Okay. Do you feel like among colleagues and just your community, there is increased awareness about the last 25 minutes of what we just talked about?
Beyond the Arab community, not at all.
And you haven't seen an uptick in it at all? I mean, the academy, from the last 7 years, the academy that you're exposed to remains completely uninterested in this.
Completely uninterested, especially in the UK. I would say, for instance, France, because it has more historical links to Lebanon, there seemed a bit more interest in what happens there because of the historical links. But in the UK, there's absolutely no interest in Lebanon. So there's been interest in the Palestinian cause in the past year. We've seen that people have taken it to the street, and it wasn't only, like people from the region. It was very much also like people in the UK. But when it comes to Lebanon, there's really no understanding, no will to know more. It feels like I live in La La Land here. There's like I feel like I live in two different realities at once.
Do they understand? Sorry, go ahead.
No. I think there's also they're probably used to us being in crisis all the time. So because you mentioned before those 5 years that we've, especially Lebanon has gone through. So the uprising, the protest, and then the financial meltdown, the economic crisis, and then the Beirut blast, and now the war. I think there's been so much happening in those 5 years that's complex and detailed and interlinked. I think it's just easier for the Western mind to see it as, this is a country, that's always at crisis. That's always, things are always going bad there. And so it's more of like, things are bad there, that what can we do? Yeah.
Do you see this as two separate crises? Do you see this, as a historian, do you see this as Palestine and Lebanon are two separate issues in this case, or is this they're connected deep? They are the same problem, just two different sides of the same coin?
So obviously Gaza and Palestine are very much a product of occupation, right? Of a very long and uninterrupted corruption. There's apartheid there, so there are specific challenges and obstacles specific to apartheid, right? Lebanon and Palestine are linked in the fact that they are both victims of Israeli occupation, of Israeli attacks, of Israeli genocidal campaigns. But what I would say about Lebanon is that this war now, the war that's happening now, is happening in a very specific historical context. That's not the same in Palestine because of what occupation means for reality there. In Lebanon, this happens in a very fragile context. So as I said, in the past 5 years, the social and political and economic fabric in Lebanon has been, weakening. People don't have access to their money. People are very tired psychologically. All of these stressors put some pressure, on coexistence and on internal, I would say cohesion. The Lebanese state is, is in crisis, right? We have a deep institutional crisis in terms of like the state not being present or refusing to be present in specific circumstances, like today, to, for instance, take care of the displaced. We have nearly 1.5 million people displaced from the south or from the Bekaa in Beirut. It was the same when the financial breakdown happened. Nobody was there to take responsibility for all of that money that was stolen, and depositors were completely alone, facing that huge theft, and no one was there to, ensure any sort of money would be, given back to them. So in Lebanon, the problem is that those institutions and the state are maimed or completely weakened by sectarian interests. So it's a very specific Lebanese problem, but I would say that there is a crisis amongst the Middle East and amongst Arab countries in general, and perhaps Palestine also suffers of that, is the crisis of representation, right? The people representing us are failing us. They're not able to either, protect us, manage our affairs. We have like a serious problem of corruption, serious problem of inefficiency, of, they're incompetent.
I want to switch gears a little bit and kind of talk about what's happening on a day-to-day basis. For those who follow you or follow, different accounts online who see these insane images to the extent where it's really hard to tell what's AI generated and not generated, because it's beyond comprehension. Just like 45 minutes ago from the taping of this, there's this heartbreaking, horrendous video of an entire building just falling, a 15-story building or a 12-story building, residential building, I think in Shneh, I'm not sure where it was, that just collapses due to a missile fire. Kind of impossible to wrap your head around. Can you give us a sense of what's happening on a day-to-day basis today and for the last sort of couple weeks? Again, this is being recorded October 22nd.
Definitely, yes. I know which footage you're talking about. It just happened a few minutes before we jumped on this call. So what is happening technically now is Israel implementing its very infamous Dahiyeh Doctrine, which is called, it's a military strategy technically called after Dahiyeh, which is the name of the southern suburb of Beirut, and which Israel has decided is the stronghold of Hezbollah. Although we know that suburbs, like everywhere in the world, are important urban center for a very varied population that cannot access housing in the center of a city usually. So they go to the suburbs of that city. But Israel has called it Dahiyeh, and it's the doctrine that they've been also using in Gaza. But interestingly, it's been called after our neighborhood in Beirut during so it was a term coined in 2008 actually by some Israeli general. I don't even want to remember his name, but this is what they had applied 2 years prior in the 2006 wars. What does it means is that against all of the laws and the rules of war and conduct in war, Israel decided that to increase its military objectives, it would bomb civilian infrastructure as a way to put pressure on whatever governments or whatever, political leadership is on the ground, and bring them to their knees, technically. So the Dahiyeh Doctrine is itself a violation of all of the rules of war. It's against international law, against human rights law, etc. So I remember they said that they don't consider villages, they consider them military post or military, location. And we've seen, so this is what they've done in 2006, and they're doing it now again in a multiplied way, right, across. So that's not something new. So in 2006, let's reiterate, they've bombed, Hezbollah, whatever, what they thought were Hezbollah affiliated region or location. But now they're doing it across the territory under this Dahiyeh Doctrine, and now they're using this new term, which is because they've killed most of the Hezbollah leadership, right? So you would think, okay, it's done now. What are you still, leveling down entire buildings, clearly civilian buildings? What are you doing? It's done. You killed Hassan Nasrallah. What's more than that? And obviously they're not stopping, because now they've fashioned a new argument, which is now they're going to destroy Hezbollah infrastructure. That's a new term. That's vague, very vague and very confusing, because what does infrastructure means? Do they mean civilian buildings? Do they mean, like they've done before yesterday, financial institution linked to Hezbollah, but under international law or protected, because they're not military they're not military targets or in combat mode. This is a lending money scheme. It has nothing to do directly with combat or fighting. So they're using this term, and with them the United States as well, to continue the destruction of Lebanon as a whole, as a country, and its civilian infrastructure, under this new theory that they want to eliminate Hezbollah. So to eliminate Hezbollah as a whole, you need to eliminate not only its rocket depot or its ammunition, you need to destroy the whole entity. But the problem is that Hezbollah is not only a militia, right? It has so many different components to it. And so in this very vague definition that they're doing, they're just very simply targeting civilian and economic and social entities, like charities, like hospitals, medical offices. They're just targeting civilian life under vague definition, and because we don't know where in infrastructure, where society starts, and when militia or military targets end.
The idea, it's so insidious, this idea of infrastructure, because as you said, infrastructure could include banks, and it could include
it include roads. Under
roads,
the pretext that they want to stop. They want to stop apparently munition and rockets from Syria to Lebanon, or to Lebanon from Syria. So they just bombed the main road between Lebanon and Syria, which is which is used by millions of people on a daily basis to go to work. But that's infrastructure. So
Can we talk about the sort of drones and psychological warfare? This is the psychological warfare, and is not new. That's has been part of what they've done, including dropping leaflets and stuff like that. That's a tale as old as time. The drones are a very clear hallmark of the 21st century, and is that sound, that buzzing sound, constant buzzing sound. In some ways is like the soundtrack of
very much
of this type of terror.
It's really bad. I mean, honestly, if you open any voice note that comes from either Palestine or from Gaza or Lebanon, you're gonna hear people talking, and in the background you will hear the buzzing of the drone. I know this from talking to my parents and my friends in Lebanon. It's just horrible. It's you as you said, it's the very specific soundtrack of that war. You know, it's always in the background, and people know while listening to this that they're, you know, constantly observed, constantly spied on, constantly, you know, tracked. And, you know, they're gathering data, they're taking picture. God knows what they're doing with patrolling the whole of Lebanon, entire neighborhood. Like this, which is obviously against all sorts of human laws, but it's also scary because we know that drones can kill now. They're not just flying around to take pictures or, you know, to record things. They can kill you and they can drop stuff on your building. So it's very scary also to hear that and wondering, is this spying on me, or is this like loaded with some sort of munition that might, you know, that they might drop at any moment. It's a new way to terrorize people, and it's unfortunately the future of warfare is that you don't need to put them anymore. You don't need to put people anymore in closed prison or in closed concentration camp. All you need to do is put them in a very dense urban center, you know, and let the drone do the surveillance, the killing, and everything.
Yeah. I want to just like go back to history for a second. If one of your students came up to you and said, hey, you know, I follow you on Instagram and I really have a hard time understanding what you're talking about. I really have a hard time. And no, I'm not Lebanese. I grew up in Thailand. I'm interested in history, and I need to educate myself. I need to have a longer history on what's happening now. What is your reading list? What do you say? Type, okay, watch this, read this, watch this documentary, listen to this thing. What is your sort of go-to reading list of like, okay, Yalla, you want to catch up? Here you go. Here's the little syllabus.
Yeah, obviously that's unfortunately for the student, there's a lot of reading to catch up to understand this, right? Yeah. As we know, it's been going on for a long time. It's not just, we've kept saying this, it didn't start on the 7th of October. But I would definitely ask the student to read something on the infamous, you know, Palestinian/Israeli conflict. There's a lot that people can read. You know, this is not only for experts or people who work in diplomacy. I think anyone today need to have at least one book on Palestine or on Israel and understand how this started. But what I would say to students, you know, and I can also, you know, tell them to read a book on Lebanese history, you know, on, you know, more on the historical context of Lebanon, how it came to be, to understand why we're here today. And they can have, you know, with these two books, they can already have some sort of overview. But what I would say to the student is to read more about colonialism, because all of these, even Lebanon's problem aside, I mean, apart from Israel, right? Apart from the occupation / attacks, the consensus, like, you know, these politics that are built around, you know, that are very anti-democratic in a sense, what we have today in Lebanon or you know, elsewhere in the Arab world. These are legacies of colonialism, right? And students or people should be aware this is not something of the past. It's not something that happened at the end of the 19th century and that ended, you know, nicely after 1945. It has very much legacies that we're seeing unfold today, and decolonization is happening in front of our eyes, and all of these has consequences that, you know, unfold for decades and centuries. It's very important that people really read and understand about that. Definitely.
Amazing. You've dodged the question.
I mean, I'm not gonna tell you which books you should read now. I can send you a list later.
Send me. Okay, we're gonna ask you to send me a list, because I definitely.
Okay.
I mean, these are questions we get all the time. Yesterday, I was at a talk, and this person came up to me and said, I care about. She's wearing a kafiyeh. She's not from the region, and she's saying, I don't know enough. What should I read? Like
On
there
Lebanon
are people
or
who
Palestine?
either one, for them to understand kind of. I mean, you can send it to us later, but I want to publish this because I think even if it's just a few titles, I think people are thirsty
Definitely
to get a broader context.
There are really
context.
good books, so there are good books out there.
Yeah. How are you doing, Intim? I know the social media game because unfortunately it's part of my life, and it's not easy posting on social media and having that be a part of your profession when you're posting nice things. If you're posting like skin routines and get help things and gardening videos, it's not nice. When you're posting about a genocide and the planned destruction of your country and your neighbors and families, homes and lives, it's devastating. انت كيفك؟
صراحة I'm not doing okay. It's also not a secret, because when I feel like it, I share how I feel also on social media, because I think it's ridiculous, to not talk about how this makes us feel. I think that being exposed to footage of destruction and death in itself is very it's what we call secondary trauma. It's traumatizing, right? Because you see what's happening to others, right? And I mean, when I say others, I say people who are there. These are my families and friends, but I'm still in safety in the West, so it's not happening to me directly, but I know it's happening to them and people that I care about. So it's very traumatizing. But having to be constantly the bearer of bad news, that's just like at some point I'm just like, I just want to shut it down. I just want to stop being the person who's always like sharing about all of the bad things happening. Like I look at my feed and it's just people dying, building destroyed, Beirut on fire, more bodies and that, and I'm like, this is my life. Technically, this is what I share with the world, and it's such a big part of my life, and it's ugly, because we deserve more softness, we deserve more nice things, we deserve more more nice things. And I get so sad when I see, the other people living around me just, as if nothing was happening. And, we deserve sometimes that, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to remain like focused on the work, right? For me, I find this like over the last month so many times, just like wanting to somehow change the channel in my head, in my brain, like somehow
how do you want
swipe
to change
and
it?
have a I don't know how to do it. It's impossible, right? But I so often find myself being like, isn't there another movie I could be, another world I could actually live in? An alternate reality, because anytime I do the logical like analysis in my head of anytime I try to circle the square of my morals and my values and my ethics and the things I care about, every single time I'm like, it leads me to be like, oh, obviously I can't change the channel. Obviously this is the only thing. Right? It's
right.
Otherwise I have to like rewrite my own internal constitution. I need to change like kind of who I am and what I care about.
Very
which
much
seems
so.
Impossible. But it can be debilitating.
Very much so. I mean, it's I think trying to be, I think there's also something that I think what you said now is highlighting that we remain attached to values, which is very important because we live in a world where you can very much live without values. The world we live in, especially capitalist, society, can, make your life very easy, even if you have a minimum of consciousness. So trying to maintain values and enact them and project them is in itself, I would say, an act of resistance compared to whatever is happening around us, however business is done usually. So even preparing for that interview, I'm like, this is using all of my energy, and I'm so tired, and it's always the emotional and knowledge labor always coming on us, weighing on us, because nobody else is doing it. But it's so hard combining this values, this mission with actual labor, doing things. When the world around you is not making this easy, right? We should be mourning now. We should not be trying to uphold our values, trying to uphold our identity and culture. We should be mourning. We should be taking a break and mourning, and we can't, because there's no break for us. This is how the world functions, business as usual.
Yeah. Before I let you go, how do you actually go about your day? How do you do your, Anna, I see how much you're plugged into this stuff, and I think, how is this person doing anything but this as a full-time life? How are you managing? Anjad, how are you managing, Chloe?
Well, I'm not managing. That's the first thing, right? I'm not managing, and I think there's these are absurd expectations we have of ourselves, especially if you're Lebanese in the past 5 years, that you should be managing according to a certain model of things. I'm not. This has had a huge impact on my mental health. So I've been in survival mode for a very long time, and this has cost me in terms of physical and mental health. But as you said, whenever I think, well, maybe I should have done things differently, I circle back to the fact that it probably would have never been differently. I would have always come back to this and done this. I think with time, you're so used to how it works that, you learn some of the ropes. You also rely on your community. I have lots of people helping me share information, verify that this is not a fake news. So you do get some experience. You do get ways of, making a task way shorter than what it used to be. But let's be very clear that I'm not managing. I'm not doing well. And unfortunately, to me, this has become the normal. That's the norm. Every day, every week, every year, the norm pushes back towards the end of the spectrum of what is abnormal. So it keeps pushing back. So now I'm like, okay, my parents are still safe. So there's no need for a panic attack today. So that this is now, or my parents are half safe. They're not being targeted right now. So I can wake up today and do more things. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually lied. This is going to be my last question. Since we started with propaganda and we started with media narratives, do you think we're doing a better job now countering this propaganda compared to in the last 20 years?
I think social media helps, right? There was no social media 20 years ago. Social media and anything is both a good and a bad thing. But the point is that we have more reach now because we have individual accounts. We don't need to publish an essay in The Guardian, thank God. and we can use and show footage, right? So now there's plenty of proof that Israel has committed genocide. We have the proof that's been screened live. You just open the video and you record it live. I think that the question should not be if we're doing it well. I think there's no point asking that question, because we're doing what we can, and we're doing what, we don't have a choice, actually. I think that's the better framing. There's no other choice than sharing whatever is happening with the resources that we have, with the energy we have, and with the bandwidth, with like the mental health that we have. That's what we're doing. We're doing the best we can with the tools that we have against a huge imperial power, right? Against the whole might of the U.S. military, whatever, capabilities. And we're doing great, I think, for people who are on the other side of the empire, and not on the winning side technically in terms of like military might, and I think that's the only thing we can do, because they're going to keep killing people whether we like it or not, and we're not able to stop them. So the only thing we can do is tarnish their reputation and show what they're doing. And what I keep saying to people around me is that the little consolation I have is that the huge price we're paying in terms of human death in Lebanon and Gaza, it's huge. It's whole families gone. Like, this is an immense price to pay. I'm just hoping that in the process we're making Zionism less mainstream, because as long as it's so mainstream, so acceptable, they're gonna keep dying. So if we can make it less mainstream, then perhaps in 20 years' time, they won't be allowed to kill as many people.
Chloe, thanks so much. I know this was hard for you. It was hard for me too. But I really appreciate your work. And thanks for making time.
Same. I really appreciate that, AFIKRA. I'm glad it's there. I hope you don't change it and transform it into something else.
No. As you said, there are many people who make AFIKRA what it is, and so when one of us is weak, the others are strong, and we kind of support each other.
That's great to know.